Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dasigner Podcast. I'm joined today by a friend. Not everyone on the show has been friends. I have met many people for the first time when we hit record, but today I'm excited to have Casey on and just kind of jive. So if this episode runs long, it's because it's two guys catching up. But Casey, welcome to the show.
Absolutely, bro. Thanks so much for having me, man. It's awesome.
Yeah. And so why don't you tell people a little bit about where you are, who you are, your family, what you do?
Yeah, yeah. My name's Casey Clark. I'm originally from Charlotte, North Carolina. Moved to Asheboro, North Carolina here just recently. I'm a dad, husband, business owner, um, entrepreneur, and have a lot of history in art and creativity. Have three daughters who are all married their first loves, which is just always a win. I love that. Two granddaughters, twin granddaughters, with my second daughter, and then my son who lives with us. He's 18, and man, I'm loving living life as a dad with a son, and doing it in a way that like just is not even adjacent to the way that I was raised. I just love it. Like I feel like I'm getting to live like dream life with my kid, with all the dad stuff, but like it's awesome. I'm loving it. My wife is just amazing. She's a singer-songwriter. We met through music. Our first unofficial date was me inviting myself, or I think her inviting me. I can't remember. The story always gets twisted, to her house for a pot of coffee and a song share. And I left that night in the car, and I was like, God, can I have this woman, please? Like, she was a dream. And so, yeah, we've spent 25 years. This February will be our 25th anniversary. We've spent a good portion of that time writing songs, traveling, spent a season as a worship pastor. After that, we did some more writing and traveling. And now we've shifted focus to where she's leading the creative edge when it comes to music. And I get to play a role of an encourager and underwriter and bounce ideas off and cheerlead from the sidelines. I get to see the best parts of the creative process with her, which is awesome. She's got a lot of great, brilliant ideas, which I get to be a part of. And so we're really finding our way in a different season of life, and man, just loving it. Really, really enjoying it. With all of its intricacies, with all of its challenges, man, it's great. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you get a chance to listen to Julie's music, it's some of the most from the heart, deep,
Mm,
rich, lyrically, musically. Her voice is incredible and unique. And yeah,
yeah.
just if you want to feel things, put
Yes.
on Julie's
Yes.
music.
Yeah. If you've never read the Psalms, I tell Julie, I'm like, you're a psalmist. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, the modern interpretation of that would be like, oh, you're a worship leader or you like do songs in church. I tell her, no, you're a psalmist because you cover every expanse of human emotion. Somehow you have the capacity to paint a visual picture with specificity of your memories, because a lot of her music is really based on memory. But I'm like, somehow, some way, your experience in life and with God is translated into these songs. And even though you're being specific, it pulls something out of me. I mean, I get to be very intimately acquainted with these stories. But if I wasn't that acquainted with them, I have found personally just like listening back, like, wow, man, I don't understand how an artist can do that. It's like she's like a train wreck. She's like, let the train just come in and wreck your heart. But like she has the capacity somehow to bring nostalgia and wonder and awe in the midst. I don't know how she does it.
And then on your end too, you're an agency owner.
Yeah, yeah. I started the agency. I didn't start it to start a business. I started it because it was an invitation. I felt this very clear invitation from God. Hey, I want you to do this. I want you to start this company. I want you to call it Legacy Creative. And I want you to make space for your kids, which is interesting to me because I'll share more about how like there's a distinction. I thought it was one and the same. There's a distinction in that has been like really revelatory for me in this season of life. But yeah, I started it with an invitation because I was in the music world. A lot of my clients in the beginning were musicians, artists, just I was steeped in creative community. So those were my people, and they just became friends, became clients. And then those friends referred me to other people, and it just kind of grew and spiraled. And then over time, it just became something where I guess I've always been very like efficiency oriented. So I began to realize that, like, man, there's got to be ways to do this further or faster. We can get further faster by incorporating certain things. So I really kind of became like a systems and processes junkie, even as a designer. Like, and of course, I mean, we don't have to get into this, but like as AIs come online, it's like I'm learning how to not draw hard lines between those things, because I'm like, this is just another tool in the tool belt for me. In my realm, in my world, to serve and steward a client's vision, I'm learning that like all those things I learned, over the last 20, 25 years as a designer and illustrator. My degree was in illustration, from Savannah College of Art and Design. And it just morphed into like, okay, I'm bringing ideas into reality. I'm telling stories. And so just leveraging design in different ways. And then because I think it just exposed me to so many more tools. And it just made more sense for that to become more of an agency covering of like, we are more full service. I'm not a videographer. I'm not a photographer. I don't do those things, but I love, finding like when it's necessary. I love partnering and collaborating with different practitioners in the creative arts, and especially in media when it comes to storytelling and, helping clients create their voice and their messaging and their aesthetic and their vibe. So yeah, the agency was just kind of a natural progression from all of my history to where I felt I was being led and what I was being invited into. I've only ever rebranded once, and I've kind of just like rode that out for a while because I just got busy being an agency. But I actually partnered with and collaborated with a really good friend, and I got on a phone call and I said, "Hey man, I feel like this is going to the next level, and I feel like our friendship or our relationship and your skill set, you'd be able to take this further than I could. I think I'm gonna hit my ceiling, and I don't think it's going to communicate what it needs to communicate." So I had him do it, and he, sent me my assets and the logos and the guidelines and a web template and all that stuff. And it was amazing. It was really fantastic. I felt like it covered the span of the things that I wanted to do, but the logo really caught my eye because it was like this lightning bolt thing. I'm like, it's like, so just tell me, like, what's the deal with the lightning bolt? He goes, well, every dream begins with a spark. I'm like, brilliant. And I know you and I, because of the communities we run with, like the creative spark is like a really common theme. And so I think for me, like even just taking further steps as an agency to say, okay, who can help me help this grow and get beyond even just my limited capacity as a designer and a just a person, like who can I invite in to collaborate? But man, it really inspired me when he said that, because I was like, yeah, that's really the crux of why I wanted to start an agency. Was like, I want to create some things that make lasting impressions, like not only just the person, but like their sphere, like who are they going to impact? What's the influence that they carry? And how can we like just steward that? How can we fan the flame? So yeah, that's kind of like where the company's gone. It's called Legacy Creative. I'm shifting my language to more Legacy Co. has always been like the short brand of that, because I'm shifting into more like coaching and consulting and establishing a collective of, just locally here in Asheboro, of artists and designers and creative entrepreneurs, and just holding space for them, just
Yeah.
holding space to encourage them and motivate them, give them some strategies, that kind of thing. Be a dad to them.
Yeah. What's that like for you? I mean, we were talking a little bit before we hit record about shifting from being the primary designer into stewarding, the way you were talking about coaching and connecting people, but then also inviting them in to be a collaborator too, which
Yeah.
traditionally isn't like the norm, right? It's like, I coach you
Yeah.
and you go do your thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I want to coach you actually through the collaboration of what we're going to create together, which is such a unique perspective.
Yeah. I feel like the term generative has been very before it was generative AI, like before that term started to get like floating around in the industry, I was using that term because I really felt like my approach to what I do as a steward, like when I look at what I do, I look at truly like my title in the company is chief curator, which actually was when I worked for a church, a guy, he hired me to be his communications director. First day on the job, he comes to the office, he goes, I need to, what do you want your title to be? I'm like, man, I don't know. I mean, communications director. He goes, that's boring. So he left the room. And I'm like, okay. And 2 hours later, I got an email signature in my inbox, and they're like, hey, here's your email signature. And it said Casey Clark, chief curator. I was just like, I'll take it. That sounds good. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, actually, I looked up the word, um, and the the two tenses, the noun tense is curate, the person in charge of the care of souls, like their hearts. What makes them tick? What's the thing that's like in them? What's incarnate in them? You know. And then the second is, of course, identify, organize, display, gallery, curator, like that kind of stuff. And so that kind of being the impetus, that being like the starting point for me, it just feels like everything I do is generative. Like I want it to be a gift. Like as an agency, I got to make money and I got to, support my family. But when it comes to the heart and soul of like why I do what I do, I'm just like, man, I want other people to thrive. And I've got what little bit of experience I have over the last 20, 25 years, the things that I've experienced, the things that I've built, the things that I've worked on, projects I've collaborated on. I'm like, man, I want to bring all that to bear. So now when I think about shifting from being the primary guy, like being the guy who has to say, I did that, or I don't think any of us really do things for the recognition. We do things because it's innate. It's just part of who we are. Like you can't not, I remember when you did the series of like bad logos and rebranding them. It's because you want to make things better. I think honestly, like artists, creatives, especially designers, because we ride that line between like creative expression, but also purposeful, meaningful. I think that intersection really resonates. Like when I saw you doing that, I'm like, man, the heart and desire to say, man, what if this was better?
Mm, mm,
Asking what if. So I think when I'm working with people now, I have a guy that I'm collaborating with on a project, and he came to me. It was his first ever project bid. I think this is a great example. He had never made more than like $1,000 to $1,500 on an illustration on a design project. He came to me, and some of the things that I've just been ruminating on, the things that like the processes and the practices that I've put into play as an agency guy, because now I have to wear all the different hats. By learning all those things, doing those things, I was like, man, he just asked me questions. He was like, man, how do I do this? Like, I don't know how to do a pitch. I don't know how to do a proposal. I don't know how to break down what I do and the other components that they have. Like, I don't even do web and, tech integrations and things like that. And I'm like, well, listen, that's what I do. But more so, you can do this. And so he just asked me questions. And I just gave him suggestions. I'm like, hey man, here's what I'd do. Here's how I'd approach that conversation. Here's how I'd have your initial discovery call. Here's how I would write up your proposal. Here's how I would pitch that proposal. Here's how I would, have conversations about objections or anything like that. And ultimately, the guy went from like his highest paid gig being 1,000, he 10x'd it, you know, and like made this massive proposal and won the proposal. And like, so for me, I'm like, man, that's a huge win. Not for me personally, it's a huge win because he won.
yeah.
Like, I saw this guy go from like, I don't know what I'm doing to grabbing it by the horns and doing it. And it was a win. That doesn't happen for everybody. And it doesn't even happen for me. I mean, I've lost way more proposals than I like to share. But the reality is that my life, I've always just kind of kept plugging forward. I've always had a pretty strong trajectory. And as I'm shifting from like the designer and doing the things, I realized, like I said this earlier when we were talking, like, there's like the big dogs of like Amazon, and then there's Temu. where it's just like we're just taking something that someone's already done and like repurposing it. I've realized at some point that when I'm working with someone who has a grander vision and a greater grasp as a designer, as a practitioner in any of the creative arts, I realized that because I'm futuristic thinking, I'm strategically thinking, I'm more of an originator of ideas. It started making more sense for me to say, I think I might be spinning my wheels in trying to get better at something that I actually have a more high level view of. Like, I know how to incorporate design. I know what good design is, but I also have the capacity and the willingness to trust other people, their instincts. And so it just started making me kind of like step further back and get a point of view. And it's kind of led me more into a position of like, you know what? I think I actually like the role of being able to choose the projects, whether it's a financial decision or whether it's a strategic decision or whether it's a passionate decision. Like, I want to be able to choose the projects that I feel I have a strong enough vision and the capacity to implement.
Mm.
Otherwise, man, I want to partner with people because I want to give them a chance to like thrive and grow. I want to invite people into an opportunity, and then in that process, whether it's solicited or not, I can't help but let people know I'm for them. And it just comes out in nuggets. It comes out in coaching. It comes out in just like consulting. I'm always asking the question, what if, and like presenting it back. Because I hear him say something and I'm like, I'm not telling you there's a better way or that my way is better. I'm just telling you that having a sense of wonder, like at some time you just land the plane, right? With a design, with a project, sometimes it's finished, right? But in the process, especially like in the beginning stages, because I am an originator, I'm always like, what if? Like, how can we push this to the degree that it feels like a really strong start and it can soar? Kind of back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I feel like I'm always like fanning the flame.
Mm. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier when you started Legacy, there was this call to you thought it was to bring your family in and mesh the two together. So what, as you've explored this, it sounds like the reality may be a little bit different. And what does that look like and how are they woven in?
I, as a dad, realized I had spent the greater part of my parenting journey working, sole provider, always saying, here's an idea, let's go for it. Here's an idea, let's go for it. Here's something, let's go do it. And not necessarily taking into consideration that the original invitation wasn't to start something to drag my family along as a part of it. It was start this company, call it this, and make space for your kids. When I realized that distinction, I was like, man, I missed it. It hindsight being 2020. Like, I've recently been about part of this dad's group. There's a guy named Chip Dodd who has a book called Parenting with Heart. And one of the first things that they talked about, they're like, parenting is like a baby giraffe on ice skates, ice skating. It's like, it's clumsy. Like, there is no perfection, there is no nailing it. And I think that just brought me so much freedom because the season that I'm in now is going back and saying, okay, it's never too late to make space for your kids. I have adult children from 18 to 30 and grandkids. So now I'm a granddad. So now I'm like a whole nother generation of people in my life that, I'm called the steward and I'm learning how to do it in a different way. One of the first steps I took was, establishing dates where it was just like, on this day, let's hop on a call, let's do FaceTime, let's connect. Just being really intentional in that space to say, I care about you, I care about your life. I'm turning what I do for clients to my kids. I'm holding space for them in the sense of like, hey, what's going on in your life? What are you dreaming about? Like, how can I encourage you? How can I help you? And with them, of course, there's a whole different level of intimacy, correct? You know what I mean? Like the intimacy that I have with my kids, like I've raised you, I've seen every aspect and dimension of your life. And now that there's distance, doesn't mean that I can't, like, I want to keep that. I think I was focused on being a provider, but I wasn't very present. And so now I'm realizing, man, the gift of this season in my life right now is I'm doing more than I ever have, but I'm prioritizing being present with them and rekindling the relationship in ways that feels like this is the gift. This was the invitation. And seeing it for what it really is. And it's me doing the work on me. It's me taking the time to realize the places that I fell short were really just my own, father wounds, my own parenting wounds from my parents. I thought I was doing things differently, but I was becoming that same thing. And so for me
Mm.
now, it's like, okay, I'm really taking a hard look and taking stock at what does it look like now to be a dad, and what does it look like now to be a parent. So it's just a different season of life, and I'm grateful for it.
How much of that, you have relationships with adult kids, which is different than the relationship with a newborn, a toddler, and elementary age kids, where it's like they are learning and growing so quickly and so much, and you're learning and growing as they do. How much of that intentionality do you think 25-year-old Casey or 30-year-old Casey could really give to them when you're just trying to keep them alive and figure it out on your own? Like, how much of this is like, oh man, I wish I would have done it better, and how much of it is like, wow, it was a different season of life, they needed something different, and I was a different human. Like, how much of that is self-realization, and how much of it is I wasn't as present as I should have been?
Yeah, I think what I'm learning now is that there's kind of these levels. So that was unconscious incompetence. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm moving towards conscious competence, meaning I know what I know because of my experience. So
Mm,
wisdom teaches us in reverse. It's experience, and knowledge is wisdom. Like things I didn't know, but I was experiencing. I didn't have the capacity to understand what I needed to do in the moment. Now, that could be argued, but I think you have to take into account family of origin, your own personal history, your own personal wounds as a dad. All those things have to come into play, because otherwise it turns into toxic shame. It turns
mm,
into a cycle of toxic shame, and you're always feeling like I didn't do enough. The reality is you'll never do enough. I'm realizing now with much older kids that like at some point it's not even my decision anymore. It's my role to just learn how to parent you in this season. And so yeah, I think it really is just a matter of looking at the history of my parenting and co-parenting with Julie on like just our kids. I'm like, man, like I just didn't know some things. So I don't beat myself up too much about it. I still have feelings about it. I still feel like, man, I totally botched that one. But it's not allowing it to turn into toxic shame where you feel like you're constantly having to make up for lost time. Now I
yeah.
feel that, but I recognize that like it's a feeling, and the reality is that when I have my conversations with my kids, it's like, no, we just never really addressed these things. We just never really talked about them, and now we are, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm learning that like actually just bringing it into the present and talking about things, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of like, my kids are old enough now that when we have these conversations, they actually are mature enough and old enough to take responsibility, but more so to have empathy and understanding. And I think that's the gift in it. That's the big gift. Like my son is 18 years old, and I feel like he has more capacity for empathy and understanding. When he's present, he's present. And same thing with my daughters. Like they're just, yeah, they're very present, very compassionate. All of them are hyper compassionate people,
Mm,
you know. So I think, yeah, shifting into this season of life, I think that's a good point that you made, that like how much of it is you just don't know things, and how much of it is wishing that you knew what you knew, but you didn't have the capacity to know.
mm, yeah.
So now it's like, I think now it's just learning really to rely on wisdom and humility, and being willing to be stretched,
Yeah.
parenting in a new season. I think it's why coaching and consulting is so important to me, because I realized I didn't have that. I'd never invested in myself. I just kept going. And as a parent, I'm like, man, can't just be like a locomotive, like running through life and hoping that everybody catches up.
I think that's why this little podcast is so important to me, because as designers, we're often comfortable talking about our work. You know, I did this, I made this, I created this. And we're not always great about this much bigger responsibility, which is
Mhm.
raising the next generation, raising these humans we've been entrusted with. And so it's been fun to have these conversations with other dads of like, yes, we're going to talk about your work. We'll probably talk about our work, but we're talking about this bigger thing as well. And if anyone can take away something, it's like getting connected with that, making time for yourself, making time for that portion of your humanity, which is often more important than obviously the thing that keeps the lights on.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've realized, the biggest lesson that I'm trying to live from is, as a person of faith, there's this component of like, I'm created in the image of a creator to create, right? Like what that looks like is really dependent upon my skill set. What do I do? But like what you mentioned, like it's easy to sit around and posture in our conversations to talk about what we do. Like it's one of the first things that people ask, right? Hey man, what's your name? What do you do? I'm learning that when I introduce myself now, it's more like I'm a father, I'm a husband, when I do this. Like genuinely want to get to that place because doing has driven me, but becoming something I think is really like grounded me more. Learning to be who I'm called to be in the arenas that matter the most have given me more capacity to be generative, to view clients and people that I'm coaching and consulting as like kids.
Hmm.
I'll say this, like the first house we bought was the address was 2218 Genesis Drive. And I was like, that's got to be a scripture. I think there's like 50 chapters in Genesis. So I look it up and it says, through your offspring, the nations will be blessed because you've obeyed me. Of course, that's God talking to Abraham, that whole promise. But then I was like, in Galatians, it talks about how that promise is ours. And I just started really taking it to heart because it felt very generational. It felt like, okay, my choices, the things I say yes to, will be the legacy I leave to my
Hmm.
kids. Now, their choices, and their decisions and their directions and their personal callings, those are theirs. They're unique. But I realized, I think the responsibility and the importance of making decisions as a dad, as a business owner, like all those decisions, they leave a mark. They
Hmm.
leave an impression, right? And so I think that's just something that I've always come back to. Like my main thing is, uh, I don't know why the invitation was to, hey, start a company called Legacy Creative. I was like, well, first of all, that's the most uncreative name ever. And I don't think my kids want to have anything to do with what I do. That was my answer. But now I'm realizing the irony of all that, or the humor of God, is like, no, I was actually telling you to do two different things, because the things that are really, really important are like, I wanted to give you purpose, but I wanted your main purpose to be like loving,
Yeah. Yeah.
being a dad. Like this is the real gift. All this stuff is just kind of to hopefully make sure that you can just keep feeding them and keep clothing them and all that stuff. There's a purpose to the doing. Now I'm just in a season where I want both to be meaningful. I want what I do to be meaningful, and I want who I'm becoming to be more meaningful, like to the people that matter to me. I think that's kind of the trajectory I'm on.
We could keep going for a long time. I do try to keep these around 30 minutes. So I do want to get to the two questions I ask everyone, which are, what has been your greatest parenting success? And what has been your greatest parenting failure or learning?
I think I'll say it simply. My greatest success is recognizing where I wasn't present, and my failure was that I was focused on being a provider and missed being present. And now I'm finding myself in a season where I'm like, we don't want to shit all over ourselves. Like, we don't want to, like, I should have done this. I did the best based on what I knew. And now I know enough now to say, oh, I can still make those right. And not in the sense of like redeem the time. Like, I know that I can redeem the time by applying what I know now to be present and to provide it something that's vastly more important and more meaningful and more helpful.
Mm.
We have, an obligation to do right by our families as providers, but like that's not the end all be all. I thought it was. I think I was I think I was actually afraid of not doing it well enough. And so it became the primary thing I focused on. All the while, like that like low grade fever of like how present are you being? But I just wasn't fully aware of it. And now it's like completely shifted. The pressure of being a provider is still there, but my focus is being present. So I think that the success failure rubric for me is like I just didn't know things I wish I would have known. But now that I know them, the success can be I can apply it.
Yeah.
That's the win.
Yeah. And when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about as creatives, you could leave something as a work in progress all the time and like never finish it. But I think it's truly true that parenting humanity is a constant work in progress. And we're never finished. And there's always tomorrow, there's always the next minute, there's always the next hour to take what we
Yeah.
learned in the last one and apply it to. And really that I feel like that's what it comes down to is like how good are you at applying what you've learned, knowing that you'll continue to trip up and it'll
Yeah.
be a constant thing. But yeah, work in progress is a
Yeah.
cool.
It's the ultimate iteration of an idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's one of the greatest ideas, parenting and I mean marriage even for that matter, but parenting for sure is like, man, this cool idea. Let's go make kids, make other human beings, and let's teach them how to be better human beings. Like it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And you just got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. I was joking with my parents. I had dinner with my parents on Tuesday night and I was joking with them. I said, "You guys got way smarter when I became a parent." And the
100%.
reality is like they've always been way ahead of me because they've had more years of experience and they had this
Yeah.
wisdom. But when I was a teenager, they didn't know anything. And that was just my silly teenage mind perspective. And once I became a parent, I was like, I need to thank you for about 3 trillion different things. And it was funny to see my mom's face, just, and she's like the sweetest, kindest person. And there was just this realization, like I didn't do these things because I wanted you to think I was smart. I did these things because it was my responsibility to raise you. And I could just somehow all of that was communicated by the expression on her face. And
Yeah.
it was just a really cool moment to see, to have that conversation with my parents of like, I'm really grateful. And in our joking, sarcastic, way that our family kind of communicates, my dad and I just kind of be like, yeah, you're much smarter now,
But,
knowing that he was always smarter all along.
but yeah. Yeah. I think realizing that for myself, I'm like, I guess one day my kids will think the same thing about me. I hope they figure it out sooner than later, and that's just me. That's just my tongue in cheek way of like addressing some of the things sometimes I deal with. Like, man, but then Julie and I sit down and talk about, man, what were we doing when we were in our 20s and 30s? Where did where did we have that same posture?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, I think it's, you know what, man, it's the rite of passage of growing up.
Yeah.
It's the price of admission for wisdom. We just have to learn things and then eventually we turn around and go. I think as parents, what we try to do is we try to infuse as much wisdom into our kids and experience, but their capacity to take it in, their capacity to apply it, it really is contingent, not on how we've raised them, but at some point, how are they growing? How are they, and this may not even be correct, but I look at it as what's their capacity now?
Hmm.
And how can I help them in this moment?
Well, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing. If folks want to find you online, or where would you direct people?
If they want to learn more about the company, legacycreative.co is probably the best place to like see work, see what we do, that kind of thing. They can always email me, hello@legacycreative.co, ask questions, learn more about what I do. But yeah, that's about it, man.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, Casey.
bro.
I'm sure we're going to talk more.
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me, man. It's been a blast.